Alright, I'm going to try to make this quick. Now, in this video, you're not going to see my face, so you're welcome. And I'm also going to try to do it all in one take, so let's see if I can do this. If I skip up or I repeat myself, I think you can handle it. I'm also going to try to be quick, so if you need to hear something again, or if you need to look at something more carefully, the pause button is in your control. So let's get moving. Today, we're going to be talking about what life was like in the South after the Civil War, both for Southern whites and for freed African Americans, and what the steps would be like after that moment. So, after the Civil War, Southerners were left feeling angry at African Americans, bitter towards the North, as well as living in destroyed towns and cities. The Civil War was primarily fought in the South. Farms, towns, villages, all destroyed by this war, and that left them economically destroyed. Now, would the North and the South ever be reconciled? Would the South ever recover? And more importantly for the rest of the country, what was next for African Americans? Although the Emancipation Proclamation freed all slaves in rebelling states, Lincoln had a lot of work to do before convincing the fragile nation to free all slaves. After his death in late 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, which abolished or ended slavery in all parts of the United States. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 granted full citizenship to all citizens born in the U.S., and eventually that turned into the 14th Amendment and stated that no state could take away a citizen's life, liberty, and property without due process of the law. In other words, without legal reasons. And that every citizen was entitled to equal protection under the law. A few years later, the 15th Amendment had to be passed. In 1870, the 15th Amendment prohibited state and federal governments from preventing any male citizen the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Notice it was just male citizens. Sorry, ladies, you have to wait a couple years. 1 second, hold on, I gotta find my notes. Alright, so, things are looking up for African Americans, right? The country's looking like it's on a good track. Wrong. Now, think what white Southerners are thinking. They're thinking they're free. They came up with the black codes in response to their freedom. These were a couple of laws that were aimed at controlling the freed blacks. They allowed local officials to arrest blacks and have them work off their fines for white employers. It also banned blacks from owning or renting farms. It was essentially slavery in disguise. All right, so that wasn't enough. You're telling me they can vote? Well, if that was the case, they passed literacy tests, the tests that proved your intelligence. Most slaves couldn't read or write, and this would prevent them from voting. Poll taxes. You had to pay a tax before you vote. Most slaves were poor, or former slaves were poor, therefore they couldn't vote. Grandfather clauses. Even if you were unable to read, or if you were too poor to pay the tax, if your grandfather could vote, you could vote. And that prevented most blacks from voting and allowed most whites to vote. And finally, you want us to treat them as equals? What? So they passed the Jim Crow laws, a series of laws that were different from state to state. However, these laws were designed to find legal and non-legal ways of preventing blacks from voting while also maintaining white dominance. Jim Crow laws were essentially legal segregation. They enforced separation of different racial groups in a country, community, or establishment. Now, these Jim Crow laws, I'll give you some examples, for instance. Here's one from Alabama in 1930. It shall be unlawful for a Negro and a white person to play together or in company with each other in any games of cards or dice, dominoes, or checkers. One from Arkansas, 1903. It shall be unlawful for any white prisoner to be handcuffed or otherwise chained or tied to a Negro prisoner. So even in prison, they were not equal. And the same thing went for segregation, whether it was in phone booths, bathrooms, water fountains. Everywhere you went, there had to be separate facilities for both. Now, white facilities were most often of better quality than black ones. But if you were to ask me, I'd say that's unfair. How can that be right? Doesn't that go against the Constitution in some way that the whites get all the better things than the blacks? I would say so. Now, if you have a problem and you think it's unconstitutional, you go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's job is to fix anything that goes against the Constitution. Here's a case that was brought up in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. This was a Supreme Court case that stated separate facilities were legal as long as they were equal. They were rarely equal. If you want to see an example of if you want to read what Plessy versus Ferguson was all about, pause it and you can take a look at this. Let me move that out of your way. All right, you can pause it and take a look at this. That should give you a pretty good idea of what was going on there. Now, that meant that separate versus equal was legal. So although they might be separate, as long as they were considered equal, that's fine. However, what people considered equal is not always the same. A white school might have new books, might have new desks, new seats, new windows, and where a black school has seats, windows, desks, books, they're not exactly in the same quality as those at the white school. So although they were separate, they were equal only in that they had those things, not in the quality of those things. Now, intimidation. These darn freed slaves keep wanting all of their rights, and nothing we do is working. So, if we can't legally get them to stop, we'll try and scare them out of it. Two organizations popped up right after the Civil War ended. The one you are all probably aware of is the Ku Klux Klan, and we'll talk more about that group in another class. The other one is the White League. This was a military organization that, and along with secret organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, worked together to prevent African Americans, freed slaves, from exercising their rights, as well as preventing white Southerners that support the rights of freedmen, known as scalawags, from helping blacks, as well as stop the invasion of the carpetbaggers. A carpetbagger was a northerner who would take all of their belongings, put it in the middle of a carpet, wrap up the carpet, sling it over their shoulder, and move down to the south to tell the southerners how they should be living their lives. The KKK and the White League worked through intimidation. As these pictures show you, they were meant to scare the living daylights out of anyone who might try to use their rights or help others use their rights. If you want to look at these pictures a little more carefully, hit the pause button. But you can see on the right, white carpetbaggers have been hung up by the KKK. On the left, you see pictures of our typical KKK standing in a field burning crosses. This was meant as a fear tactic, and we'll talk more about those as we go. Now, for our next class, I want you to be thinking, why were these practices able to happen? And why didn't freed men and blacks just leave? These are questions you can think about. When we meet in our next class, we'll have a chance to talk about those. I hope this was quick enough. 7.5 minutes. Not as quick as I would have liked, but again, you can deal with it. At least you didn't have to see my face. All right, guys, take care. Good luck.